tonight the devastating effect of neighbour turning on neighbour.
His two brothers were killed. He lost his brother. He disappeared. His younger brother and his father were killed. Her two brothers were killed.
And what became of the man whose image defined a war? Good evening and welcome to the Tonight programme. Almost 2 decades ago, a small town in northern Bosnia became the focus of a terrifying campaign of ethnic cleansing. In less than 2 days, its residents all but disappeared. Many of them were taken to detention camps. Tonight, Penny Marshall returns to the country to try to find out what happened to those terrified prisoners she discovered in 1992 and what became of their guards. And she also investigates whether the recent capture of Ratko Mladic, one of Europe's most wanted men, is the start of the final chapter of Bosnia's unfinished business.
It wasn't very long ago, and it wasn't very far away. But more than 130,000 people lost their lives in the early 90s as Yugoslavia tore itself apart. In the Bosnian capital, Sarajevo, snipers made crossing a street a matter of life or death. Whilst all eyes were on that city, I headed north with ITN to investigate claims that the Bosnian Serbs had set up a string of detention camps.
The Bosnian Serbs don't call a massacre a concentration camp. Come in, they challenged ITN, and see it for yourselves.
We found entire communities of Muslims and Croats had been cleared off their land and imprisoned. It was the first proof of the horror of ethnic cleansing. We saw evidence of beatings and starvation and heard whispers of murder and rape.
The British news organization, ITN, had managed to get 2 reporters into camps in northern Bosnia.
The reports we filed shocked the world.
The pictures of the prisoners rounded up by the Serbian forces and being held in these detention camps are stark evidence of the need to deal with this problem effectively.
One image taken from our footage became part of history. When we first saw this young man in one of the camps, he was starving. He says several of his ribs, his jaw and nose were broken, his teeth shattered. His name was Fikret Alic. He's now in his 40s and a big bear of a man. A father of 3, he's physically recovered but mentally scarred.
Very stark for me.
Difficult.
Yeah, difficult for me. This is not nice.
Now all those wanted for the crimes committed in the camps have been caught, we've returned to the place where we first met.
I was only here for a very short time.
Yeah, yeah.
And the soldiers were moving me, making me, trying to get me to the other side.
Yes, I know.
Because they didn't like me filming here.
Yeah.
When I first saw Fikret, he was one of about 500 men who'd just been brought to the Ternopilje camp from another detention centre. Some of these men, including Fikret's cousin, were later taken out of the camp on a convoy and shot.
And these were your neighbours?
Yes,
Not
no
big
more.
Strangers?
Why? Yours blood, my blood. You stay, you want, I want.
Same.
Yes.
Serb,
Why?
Muslim,
Yes,
Croats, the
yes.
same.
Why shooting? Why? Because here, so much place. Very big place. Every day, yours home, my home, no problem.
Enough room for everyone.
Yeah, everyone. I thinking why. Every night I'm sleeping or thinking why. 4 years, neighbor to neighbor, shooting. I'm not understand this.
Fikret and many of the prisoners driven from their homes had come from a small town called Kozarats.
When I arrived here in 1992, I was driven along this road and all of these houses had been destroyed. There was nothing here. It was like a ghost town. And I can remember seeing a little row of shoes on one of the doorsteps and thinking to myself, something really dreadful must have happened here.
But Kozarats has now come back to life. Thousands of its residents have returned. I'm astounded by the recovery of this community today, just as nearly 2 decades ago I was shocked by the extent of their suffering. But Kozarats is still burying its dead. Bones dug up from recently discovered mass graves. 111 coffins were carried into Kozarats' cemetery this summer in a single day. It's against this tragic backdrop that those who've returned here now must try to move on. Although several thousand of those Muslims driven out have come back, not everyone wants to live here permanently, for this town now sits in Serb-controlled Bosnia. After the war, many became refugees abroad and now only return for the summers.
This one here is from Norway. This one, England. All them at the top is from Switzerland. Up there is a bit Slovenia. Even though I was born in England, I've always felt like, it was home here.
I met Harry Paratusic's father, Jamal, in the most notorious camp, Omarska. The prisoners' fear there was palpable. Every word they spoke was listened to by their hostile and armed guards. But Harry's father dared to hint at the terrifying reality.
How are you treated? What are the conditions, I asked? I don't want to tell lies. I can't speak the truth. Thank you for coming.
Harry now comes back here to the town he calls home every summer.
I spoke to your dad because I was hoping he'd be here, but he's not with you. Why is that?
Me and him and my mum, we visited Moscow 2 years ago. And ever since then, he hasn't been the same. He hasn't been sleeping. I'm back, and it brings back a lot of emotions for him. He lived through something that no one wants to live through.
Omarska was an horrific place. Nearly 500 men are thought to have died there, and of the 1,300 still missing in the area, many are thought to have disappeared from the camp. Some of the guards we filmed are now in jail for rape, torture, and multiple murder. The experience of the father has affected the son.
Are you friends with Serbs now here?
Most of my friends here are Muslim, and then when you go back to England, there's, but they're not.
Not mixed up.
I separate them from, Serbians, and then,
You can't hate a whole race, can you?
You can't hate a whole race, but if you've lived through something as severe as that or as bad as that, it's questionable.
Some people are managing to form friendships across the divide. I found Serbs and Muslims playing football together. But talk of the war is raw, and they never discuss detail.
So you two are friends?
Yes, definitely. Yes.
And I believe one of you is a Serb and one is a Muslim. I can't tell the difference.
Yep, I am a Serb and he is a Muslim.
Okay. So do you ever talk about the war?
Yes. Yes, sometimes.
Is it difficult?
Definitely, as he was the one in a camp, so worse off than I was.
Do you talk about who was worse, whose fault it was?
No, we don't politicise at all.
Mladic,
Hero or villain?
Why are you asking us that question? Please, please, we're a sports club and we do not want to talk about that. The situation is so complicated. Us two have accomplished this in 3 years, and one condition was not to bring politics onto the field. And that's how we have achieved this.
But it's hard to keep politics out of everyday life when what the wartime politicians say in the dock still divides opinion. Bosnian Serb leaders Radovan Karadzic and Ratko Mladic currently face charges of genocide at The Hague. Karadzic denies that civilians were rounded up and murdered in the camps. He didn't like what we discovered. He says we lied.
I wonder how Miss Penny Marshall sleeps after all the harm she inflicted on us.
Both men are defiant in their denials.
Under count 1, Mr. Mladic, you are charged with genocide, punishable under Article 4.3a of the statute.
No, I'm not going to listen to this. I'm not going to listen to this at all.
Back in the hills above Kozarac, it all filters down. I've found Bosnian Serbs openly holding those being tried in The Hague in high regard.
He's a soldier and he defends the Serbian people.
Good man.
Good. Who, Mladic? Good. First class.
Jel Srbe buni što da nije bilo Mladića? Srba bi nestalo.
If there was no Mladic.
So not a criminal.
Kakav kriminalac? Koga je ubio?
What kind of criminal? Who did he kill?
This man dismissed events altogether.
In Moscow, just down the road. Just a... They were all... Nobody was hurt, really, you think?
Ugrožen, ubijen tu.
U tom logoru niko ubijen nije.
Nobody was killed.
The Hague, then, hasn't stopped the competing histories. It's not fair to say that this extreme denial is typical, but the fact that I found someone saying anything like it alarmed me. If Kozarac is to have a safe future, there must first be agreement about the past.
What am I seeing here, Saka? This is an extraordinary place.
It's a monument for people who were killed in 1992. And
the denial upsets this former prisoner, Ratko Mladic, who believes there must be recognition before there can be reconciliation.
Children you're seeing in these streets having fun, not knowing of anything we are speaking tonight, who live in Kozarac, live in Bosnia, come back to Bosnia. Well, there's a hatred against them because of who they are. Because Serbs did not cope with their past. Maybe Bosniaks also. I mean, there were Bosniak war crimes too, but not on that scale.
Satko's grandmother is still missing. He's determined to find out what happened to her. Too old to run, he had to leave her behind when the shelling of the town started.
She was great. She was such a beautiful, great woman.
Well, I hope you find her.
I hope so too.
When you spend any time here, you realise that everyone is missing someone. There's virtually no family that's complete. Everyone was touched by this war. And in the cafes, they talk endlessly about the past and about those who didn't make it to share with them in the present.
His 2 brothers were killed. He lost his brother. He disappeared. And then he lost 1 brother.
School photos are not supposed to be tragic. Years on, they're often the cause of much laughter, but not for Kemal Pavanic.
His younger brother and his father were killed. He was a camp guard. This may look just like a photograph to you, but this photograph actually illustrates the community that existed before the war. You know, where people share their classrooms, people work together, people were marrying each other.
Kemal and his brother Kasim were imprisoned for months in the Omarska camp. Kemal now lives in London, but often comes back to Bosnia. Some of the neighbours who imprisoned the brothers might have been jailed, but others who did nothing to stop it still live close by. The local postman, for example, worked in a maska. He now delivers mail to his former prisoners.
Meni je žao za svakoga ko je nekoga ošamario, kamoli nešto napravio. Jer ja znam da su to ljudi koji...
I feel sorry for anyone who even received a slap, let alone a beating, as I know they didn't do anything wrong. I tried to help anyone I could, and I brought food as many times as I could.
It looks like a functioning society, and there's no longer any fighting, but in the area tensions remain.
Is there a lot of hate? Do people walk past each other full of hatred and spit at each other, or do they ignore each other? Is there a wall of silence? What's the atmosphere like?
Well, people... Oh, here's this guy. He was a camp guard.
We just passed the local butcher.
How does that make you feel now, seeing him?
It's funny to say, it almost feels normal. You know, this is part of normality around here. This is our reality.
The people whose post is delivered by a former guard, who have to buy meat from a former guard, who go to the market and have to shake hands with a former guard, how can they deal with it?
Some people can, others can't.
Amasca's now a working mine. Once a year, relatives and survivors return here to remember the prisoners who didn't make it out. They visit places like the White House, where prisoners were tortured and very few survived.
I will always come here. I already found one of my brothers here, but the second one and my husband I haven't.
Is the Hague process working? Not for victims like Nasiha Klipic. She tells me justice isn't enough.
But she doesn't want another war.
To be honest, I would like another war. They were killed just because they were Muslims.
Like the denial on one side, the talk of revenge on the other threatens the peace here, and they feed off each other. How then to protect the next generation from growing up to finish the war their parents started? Children in this area increasingly go to separate schools, and outside the towns rarely mix. Reconciliation projects are in very short supply. Kamal runs workshops in the summer. What he and his volunteers are doing with the children from all sides is unique.
This isn't a typical activity for the children here. What are you trying to achieve with this workshop?
In my opinion, these children are the greatest victims of the war, yet they have nothing to do with it. They are being taught wrong things at home and very often in schools. I think if the current political situation continues for the next, let's say, 10 years, these children may end up fighting each other in another war.
And this extraordinary meeting is evidence that the divide can start to be bridged with effort. Milojca Beric was one of Kamal's jailers and one of the men I filmed guarding the prisoners. Kamal has persuaded him to take part in a workshop and to talk to us. He accepts atrocities happened, murders too, but says he was never involved.
Was he ordered to go and work in a mask?
Tu niko nije išao dobrovoljno. Dobrovoljce nisu išli samo naredi moraš ići tu. Znači, tu je bilo vojno naređenje i gotovo. Znači, vojska je bila u tom svemu izvršna.
He's saying nobody went to work as a guard in Amarska of their own will. They were ordered, to go and work as guards. He said it was a military order, and people just had to go.
I asked Milojca if everyone mixing would help the communities heal.
Pa ja se nadam da bi trebalo. A ako to shvataju svi kao što shvatam ti, razumiješ?
He said, he hopes it should prevent the war, if everybody thinks about it the way he and I think about it.
This gave me hope. But more than 2,000 people lost their lives in this area, and so many are still missing. Today, Satko's continuing his search for his grandmother. At the morgue, the Missing Persons Commission has retrieved the bones and clothing of 5 unclaimed elderly women from Kozarac. He doesn't recognize any of the garments.
It makes you realize that these all bones were people once, were someone's fathers and sons and grandmothers or children. There's a few of people who, a few of Serbs who understand what happened, who would recognize what happened, but the politicians, the media, history books, etc., are just putting it away. It's kind of never happened. And I mean, you can put a lot of things away, but you can't put away these bones. So there is a lot of work to do.
The ghosts of Bosnia's war haunt this village, and in some ways they make the conflict seem unresolved. Whilst I've been here, yes, I have seen some signs of reconciliation, but I've also heard whispers of revenge. And perhaps most deafening has been the silence of what's not being discussed.
It seems to me that the only thing all sides can agree on is that there was a terrible war and that everybody lost. In predominantly Serb villages, they too have much to remember. In other areas, Serbs suffered at the hands of their Muslim and Croat neighbours. The cycle of violence here goes back more than a century. And what of the man who became such a symbol of the war? Today, Fikret Alic is more concerned with the future than the past. He comes back to Kozarac every summer and is trying to make a life for his children here.
I want to build a future where it teaches the kids a history about the war, and that neighbours killed neighbours. I want them to build a future that is focused on life and not hatred, focused not on the details of who was Mladic and who was Karadzic, but to know what has happened here and to move on beyond that.
19 years ago, Fikret was living proof of man's inhumanity to man. Today, he's proof of man's ability to survive and to recover. But forgiveness doesn't come so easily.
After all these years, can you forgive the neighbours who did this to you?
The ones that were intentionally bad, never. The ones who were beating me and did harm to me, maybe. But the ones who killed the women, the children, the older population, I could never forgive them.
I returned to Bosnia to look for some sort of happy ending. And it is wonderful to see Fikret with his family, wonderful to see their town rebuilt. But there's unfinished business here. There are just too many wounds and too much history to be sure of a happy ever after.
All those wanted for war crimes from the 3 main ethnic groups in the Balkans have now been brought before a judge. It brings to an end the hunt for those indicted by the UN. Now, if you'd like more information on our programme this evening, please visit our website at itv.com/tonight. Until next week, though, good evening and thanks for watching. Coming up next week, with families across the UK bracing themselves for higher gas and electric bills this winter, Tonight investigates the pricing practices of Britain's big 6 energy companies.
Billy Connolly's about to have some seriously good fun as he travels along Route 66 for a new series. The 4-parter starts at 9. We head back to Emmerdale next, but will Aaron's loved ones finally realise the situation? ITV2 is with the Extra Factor next as Caroline and Ollie enjoy more auditions.